rates down to 1%, and they started running budget deficits. And we had the most shallow recession since the Second World War. And everybody was saying, this is fantastic. This is great. Look at all the good the government did. Well, they stimulated us out of that recession into this depression. We never would have had a housing bubble if we didn't have the stimulus under George Bush. We never would have had a subprime market. You know, all of these firms that went bankrupt would still be in business. We wouldn't have trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. None of this would have happened had it not been for the stimulus under George Bush. So was it worth it? Was the trade-off worth it for a few years of deluding ourselves that we were making money in the housing market? Was it really worth the situation? And the question we have to ask ourselves now is, if all that, this major disaster, right, if that was the result of the Bush Greenspan stimulus, what's going to be the payback for the Obama-Bernanke stimulus? Because it's even worse, right? Greenspan had interest rates at 1%. Now they're at 0. They're nothing. It's free. And the Bush deficits were, what, 300 billion, 300 billion? Now they're almost 2 trillion. I mean, it's not even in the same ballpark. And, you know, I laugh about it when, you know, the OMB, you know, recently came out and they had to revise the budget upward, and they're coming out and saying, no, here's our budget projections, right? They said we're going to run $10 trillion deficit over the next 9 or 10 years. 10 trillion. This is our budget, and they put it out with a straight face, you know, as if it could even be financed. But you would think, if you're in the Office of Management and Budget and your job is, okay, we're going to try to, you know, figure out that if you put the numbers together, right, on a piece of paper, and it came back, you know, $10 trillion deficits, that you would, you know, you'd call in the congressman or the senator and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, we need to redo this thing here. You know, according to this deficit, we're going to have, you know, $10 trillion of deficits. We need to cut spending somewhere. You know, but no, they're coming out with it like that's the actual budget. Like as I said, if your son comes home from school, and he says, Dad, you know, here's my 10-year study plan. I got this plan. I'm going to flunk every course for the next 10 years. And you go, oh, all right, that sounds like a plan. You know, let's go with that. And you can't, with a straight face, say we're going to borrow all this money. How are we going to do it? Who's going to lend it to us? Is anybody really that stupid? You know, we're worried that the Chinese have got $1 trillion worth of U.S. treasuries. And what we're saying is, oh, well, they can't afford to sell because they take a huge loss on that $1 trillion, so they're stuck. They're not stuck if we're asking them to lend us another $5 trillion. Because remember, half of everything we borrow comes from China. So if China sees that we're planning on borrowing $10 trillion over the next 10 years, they know that we've penciled them in for $5 trillion. So now they don't have to worry about the trillion they've got. That's small potatoes compared to the $5 trillion we're asking them to pony up. So they're not going to be there doing it. Look what just happened in Japan. I just was reading an article. They had a big change in the government in Japan, the most sweeping change since the Second World War. And if you look at the statements coming out of the leadership, they want a strong yen. They're tired of undermining their currency to prop up their exporters, and they've said so. And they've said that basically, why do we want to diminish the purchasing power of our citizens? We want to revive our domestic economy. And they know that a strong yen does that because it makes products cheaper for the Japanese. So hopefully, at least for the Japanese, their leaders are no longer going to be undermining their own purchasing power just to prop up the United States. The same thing is going to happen in China. So those are our two biggest creditors, Japan and China. And if they're not going to be buying as much of our debt, look, rates are going to go up. They have to go up.